Well, as someone used to say, time's yours.
Assumptions when it comes to the schools. It's got $120 million from the sales tax and $83 million from the cigarette tax in Harrisburg again. Council wants half of that 120. How do you make those numbers up? You know, make up the numbers to give the school district the 20 whatever it comes out to be.
203. So again, as I said in my remarks, because of to stay in compliance with legal provisions, we can only show in the budget revenue sources that have already been enacted. And in both cases, each of those has been enacted, but by different entities. Sales tax by the General Assembly, signed by the governor, and cigarette tax by City Council and signed by me. Having said that, as I said in my remarks, I have been consistently, I think since sometime last year, and in virtually every speech that I've made, touching on this particular topic, that I am for, and there's great agreement between Council President Clark and I and a number of other state legislators that we do want to see a split in the sales tax, complemented by, of course, the cigarette tax getting passed. It's really the only way that works. The answer to your question, of course, that math results in a slightly lower total than both sources completely going to schools. And to make that up, quite honestly, we would have to find an additional funding source to close that particular gap. So, but I think the big thing to understand here is the original idea, notwithstanding what has happened, the original idea was a split in the sales tax, get the cigarette tax done. The school district out of that gets $153 million, and the city gets about $70 million going to the pension fund. So both get fairly well taken care of. And that certainly seeks, again, to try to address the 120 that the school district has already incorporated into their budget, plus the $75 million new money that they've asked of us, which comes to a total, of course, of $195 million. So we have work to do. But we need to get both of these passed and figure out, what new potential funding source can make up the gap.
How do you handicap getting the cigarette tax passed? It seems like there's a brick wall in Harrisburg.
You know, any of these big efforts always require big effort coming from the city, working with our delegation. So I'm in regular communication with our House Chair of the Philly delegation, Representative Sherelle Parker. She is actively, aggressively pursuing this issue in Harrisburg. We talked to our State Senate Philly delegation chair, Senator Kitchen or Senator Hughes or Senator Washington or Senator Williams, all actively trying to push from the Senate side. So, we're back in budget season. The district has an ask of us. They have other outstanding requests. I don't know what those dollar amounts are, possibly with regard to the state or anticipated labor savings. So we have work to do. I mean, the challenge here, what I don't get, quite frankly, out of this process is council has already, the local governing body has already approved a proposed local tax to fund local schools. All the General Assembly has to do is pass the authorizing legislation to allow that to go forward. I don't know why any legislator in Harrisburg would truly care whether or not the local governing body and the executive in partnership have supported new local tax revenues that do not cost the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania one dime, that we're trying to do something here at home, and all we need is the authorizing legislation. So, quite frankly, I don't get it. I don't understand. We're not asking the Commonwealth in this particular instance for anything other than to allow us to do our job down here in Philadelphia. So that's our fight. We'll continue to push. I think there, in some sectors, and any parts of the four caucuses, there is, some amount of support for this, and that's how we're going to spend, for me at least, that's how I'm going to spend most of the budget season in Harrisburg, trying to get both of these issues addressed, as well as maintenance of effort and a couple other things. Mike?
On that, I'm sure you've heard, as I've heard, that part of the reason the legislature has thus far not moved on that is because of intense lobbying from both the tobacco industry and convenience store and other grocery chains. And isn't that something that's insurmountable?
I'm from West Philly. I don't believe in insurmountable. I think that when it comes to educating children, whether in this city or across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, you have to exert extraordinary efforts to improve their life outcomes. And so, even our own model, while it may show some amount of decrease, which is a good thing, in smoking, unfortunately, I think it's not like everyone's just suddenly going to stop. I mean, it's obviously an addictive product. I don't want to get into that conversation. It's the United States of America. People have a right to lobby. I just think that folks here should be lobbying on behalf of children. It's the outreach that I've made. This has never happened before. Give me a sneeze. It's the outreach that I've made to the chamber. We're enjoying good support from the Chamber of Commerce in this particular regard to get the authorizing legislation enacted in Harrisburg. So we have work to do. A lot of people didn't think we were going to get House Bill 1828 passed a bunch of years ago, the 1% sales tax extension. It happened because we needed for it to happen. This is about local education, local funding, and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania should give us that authority. So I understand there's opposition, but the flip side of opposition is support. And I think that there are more supporters than there are opponents in this particular regard. Bruce.
Mayor, Council President Clark seemed disappointed as he stood with 9 other members of council, plus the union folks from the PGW and the DC 33. Seemed disappointed that the budget appears to set aside monies for raises that are not equal to the DC 47 raises that ultimately came about. He had a problem with that. Obviously, DC 33 had a problem with that as well. What was your mindset in deciding that was the amount of money to set aside for that contract?
Well, when we were putting the budget together, as you well recall from a timeline standpoint, we had a tentative agreement and signed an agreement just, I guess, about a week or so ago with District Council 47. So we know what those numbers are. We're in negotiations with DC 33. We have a specific offer on the table in those negotiations. I'm not going to put a different number in the budget for unconcluded contract negotiations. It's just not how you do that. If we end up at a different place, then we'll have to amend our budget, but I'm not going to put in a budget, a number that we haven't agreed to. In the DC 47 case, we have agreement, and we know what those numbers are.
Mayor, there also seems to be a good deal of
I don't think I'm going to blow my nose on live TV.
there seems to be a good deal of opposition developing in council of selling PPW. What are your plans for getting that through?
I saw some portions of the post-budget speech press conference. I don't know that I would necessarily characterize it as mounting opposition. I would characterize it as growing concern and a need for information. For most people, I think it is a little difficult to actually be opposed to something that you don't have the necessary information upon which to make a rational judgment. I think that any one of us in our human capacity will have, a kind of a personal thought or idea or a visceral reaction to, something new, which quite frankly, this is not a new idea. This is a discussion that's been going on at least since Mayor Rendell's time and Mayor Street's time. This is a 20-year discussion that's been going on in this city, and we've been actively engaged in a process for about 4 years. So it's not like we just, It's not like this morning I just suddenly sprung on folks, or the other day that we sprung on people that, oh, we're thinking about the potential sale of PGW. It is our responsibility, and I received a letter from Council President Clark late on Monday evening requesting a great amount of information, as we would anticipate, and which we had already planned to provide. It's helpful to have the letter. We know what it is that you're asking for, and I'm sure there'll be subsequent requests. So I think that even the President's response, if I'm remembering correctly, which I appreciate, he said, we don't have the information. How could we possibly prejudge or make a decision about something that we don't have any information on? I expect that they're going to, as I said in my remarks, they're going to go through a due diligence process. They'll probably have their own consultants to look at all of this information. So I thought it important and significant that the President was, very straightforward and clear in his thought process and analysis that we'd like to get the information first before trying to make any kind of decision, which I think is the right thing.
But he was also visibly annoyed, and frankly what he had to say was a theme that we've heard from the council before, which is that we don't get the information, fair or unfair. The claim from council is we don't get the information from the mayor's office in a timely fashion or at all. He was clearly irked that they had no documentation whatsoever on this large deal. Do you believe this is just a question of the timing, they're wanting things sooner than you can provide them, or does he have a legitimate beef here?
Well, I think the legitimate issue here is that we owe council a bunch of information. I mean, this is a major transaction. It involves, a publicly traded company. There are rules and regulations on up through, the SEC. And so there has been a period during which every bidder and everyone involved in the process, including myself, were subject to a confidentiality agreement, which we take very, very seriously. There are serious rules and laws involved in confidentiality agreements. And so on the one hand, that is the process. On the other hand, it is unfortunate that you can't be more forthcoming. That pretty much all goes away after Monday's announcement. And so we are compiling the information, and we will give everything that we possibly can give, short of either proprietary or personal, private information to the council, and get as much information, that same information, out to the public. So I understand the concern. I share the concern, and it is our responsibility to get that information out as quickly as possible. And quite frankly, we want that information out as quickly as possible because we want folks to be able to rationally, methodically, systematically, with a good analysis, to be able to see what we've seen and what we understand, have a legitimate discussion and debate about those issues. And you can't really do that if you don't have all the information. That's our job, that's our responsibility. We'll meet that test. We've got a ton of folks working on the requests that we received Monday night from the Council President. We'll get that information out as quickly as possible. Some of which is already out in the public sphere because UIL released already the asset purchase agreement, the APA. And I think the challenge there is that is one of a series of documents, and some of the other documents, attachments and appendices, do contain either proprietary or personal data, which we cannot release. Not material to many of the questions being asked, but you cannot just kind of ship it out in the public in that fashion. So one of the things that we're looking to do, all these legitimate concerns that have been raised. How do you maintain the low-income customer programs? How do you maintain the senior citizen programs? What about the 3-year rate freeze? What about the current employees who are vested in a pension, which will be capped off and fully funded by the potential buyer? All of those issues and concerns, some of which are addressed in the APA in language that is so legalistic and dense that even as a pretty decent reader of the English language, at least, is hard to understand. And some, and I heard the concerns, and I've talked to Mr. Keith Holmes a couple times now, many of his serious, legitimate, real concerns are in other documents that he does not have and are not out in the public realm that could answer clearly many of the concerns that he and his members have. And they're the same concerns that I had from the start and that we ensured were a part of this process. I did not say Monday. That was a nice try, Robert. We will get it out as quickly as possible. I think, as you can imagine, given the nature of the transaction, the size of the transaction, there are a lot of documents. And again, we have to be very, very careful about, even within a document, some things, again, if they have contain personal private information or proprietary information for the company, may not be able to be released, which may be attached to other things that can be released. And so you really have to go through all of those materials. But I am not anticipating, given that today's Thursday, I'm not anticipating that it's going to be Monday.
School funding, if Harrisburg does not act on those two measures or to get the indication it won't have any time for our budget, do you have a backup plan to get the $75 million?
You know, our plan at the moment is the plan. Today is, you know, whatever today's date is, March 6th. You know, we have months to go through a process. I'm going to remain realistically optimistic about what's going on. This is a serious matter, and it is my expectation that folks here in the city, elected officials and others, will aggressively pursue these funding measures, which, you know, from my perspective, are truly no-brainer kinds of items for the folks up in Harrisburg. Maybe some, you know, politics and all of that kind of creeps in from time to time. We'll try to sort through that, but no one can dispute, no one, there's not a person alive who can dispute that the School District of Philadelphia, and more importantly, the school children of the city, need these resources to get a great education. And so that's where we need to keep our focus. That's what this needs to be about, and it really is a fight for the future of this city. If we can't educate our children, they will not be the productive citizens that we want them to be, and it will damage the economy of this city and the many folks who are living here, folks who have moved here, folks who are thinking about coming here. If we can't at least do that and get beyond some of the adult nonsense and politics that often characterize these efforts, then shame on us.
There was some concern among some of the city employees, in particular water department, that if you're selling PGW, what's next? And there were, you know, concerns about the water department being next. Could you address that? I mean,
I have no interest at all, none, less than zero, in even thinking about. So let that be the last question on this particular matter, in even thinking about any sale of the water department. Never been a thought of mine, never thought about it until you asked me the question. I hope it's the last time anyone asks me. Dale.
So the sale of PGW, I think that some of those proceeds were going to go to the pension fund, and the split, the $120 million, is supposed to, you know, be for the schools and the pension fund, although originally it was supposed to go for the schools. I wonder whether the political calculation changes at all, you know, the sale, in terms of the, you know, the need to maintain the split of the $120 million.
That's the proposal at this point in time. I don't necessarily see that changing. Yeah, I don't think that one affects the other either way. You know, the prospect of that level of investment from a potential sale of PGW into the pension fund, plus upwards of you know, $70 million in recurring revenues from the sales tax. When you're looking at a pension fund that is 48% funded, the amount of time that it will take to get to, you know, at least our goal of, you know, somewhere between 75 and 80%, you know, over the next 10, 12 years or so, we have a long way to go. And it is part of our responsibility is to help ensure that our hardworking public employees and retirees are secure in their pensions. We've had hits like everybody else as a result of the recession, and we need to, you know, put this pension fund on a path of financial stability once and for all. This is a problem that has been a challenge for the city for at least the last 30 to 40 years. I made a commitment a long time ago, before I was mayor of the city, that we were not going to kick the can down the road, that we were going to do something or try to do something significant. And that has been a goal from day one until we ran into the recession in late '08. But this has been on the agenda for a long, long period of time.
Your comment about the library was not in your prepared remarks about apologizing and agreeing with council's position.
No, it wasn't. It was a personal addition.
That's what I was asking. Why did you decide to add that?
Because it's been on my mind for the last 5 years. This has troubled me for a long time. It is the absolute worst decision that I've made in the time I've been in public office. I have a very deep and personal appreciation for library services. I know what the library did for me as a kid. It was the toughest decision, at least in terms of budget issues, that I've ever had to make, and ultimately determined that I was wrong. And it's been it's just been a personal goal to fix that. And that's what I wanted to do. And I was determined to get it done. And that's what we did today. Bob?
I wondered, theoretically, what is the difference between selling a municipally owned gas utility and selling a municipally owned water utility, in your view?
I think there are big differences. You know, gas service is, again, in my view, nowhere near a core, fundamental service of a city government. On the other hand, as literally one of the essentials of life, and the kinds of things that the water department does, watershed protections and management, having literally one of the first water services in the history of the United States of America, and the kinds of things that Commissioner Newkrug and his team do. Green City Clean Waters being probably the biggest recent example. This is a nationally and internationally recognized program of how we deal with stormwater management and combined sewer systems, and how we protect the water of this city as, again, a life essential element. And I just think that these are two vastly different services that we provide here in the city. And with that in mind, and my experience with the water department over now 20 plus years of service, I have no interest whatsoever in trying to entertain a discussion about that asset being anything other than owned by the city of Philadelphia. It is a part of the core services of what at least this government, in my view, should be providing. So they're very, very different entities.
And what would you consider to be a reasonable amount of time for council to perform its due diligence on PGW and render its vote?
On my worst day, you would not be able to trick me into proposing. If I were asleep or just awakening, you would not be able to trick me into answering that particular question. I think that council, knows how to conduct business, knows how to deal with big issues. They will get advice and recommendations from whomever they bring on. I think that they will treat this particular issue for the serious matter that it is, and that hopefully in whatever anyone considers to be a reasonable period of time. They'll be able to look at the facts, do the analysis, any comparisons or anything else, and hopefully pretty much come to the same conclusion that I did, which is the price is the highest price that anyone put forward. The contract is the best terms that anyone put forward, and many of the other protections that we've talked about.
If it were to slip till next year, is that a problem for you?
Again, I'm not going to get into trying to put parameters around the process for City Council. I think all I can ask is that in conducting their due diligence, that it's done with the seriousness that the proposal warrants, that City Council has taken up important and significant matters in a reasonable period of time, and they're all adults upstairs and know how to conduct the city's business. When you asked me that question the other day when you were standing over there, what I said, you asked me, you know, how long do you think something like this should take? And my response was, between the City Council process and the PUC process, given that we're in early March, you know, you could conclude a transaction like this in the course of a calendar year. But again, we don't know how long City Council will take. I don't even know the full extent of the PUC process, but I mean, again, it's March. So. No, I'm tremendously optimistic, and again, I think when people get all the information, you know, I don't think so far I've heard anything that I didn't expect to hear. You know, day one, day two, day three of possibly the largest, I think I read a quote from the Council President, maybe it was on Tuesday, characterizing this as possibly the, you know, biggest transaction in the history of the city of Philadelphia. I mean, it just can't be a surprise that with virtually no information, people may have varying levels of skepticism. That is not a surprise to me. And I think that when folks get more information, they'll certainly be, by their own admission, better informed and may come to a different conclusion. So let's not, you know, there have been a lot of big things that have come through this place. I was upstairs for a while, and people talked about stadiums. We've talked about AVI. We've talked about all kinds of stuff that may have started out in one place with a particular mindset and ended up in another place over time. So,
are you getting any indications from council that the votes may very well be there, and that there's a majority that's in support of the sale of PGW?
I think it is tremendously premature 3 days after making such an announcement to even think about trying to count votes. Again, with folks having no information other than either what they've read or, you know, the general, you know, rumors and innuendos and all kinds of stuff flying around, most of which are just completely either inaccurate or wrong. So, I mean, we are where we are.
What do you believe will happen when 3-year moratorium on rate increases and layoffs expires?
I think it is impossible to predict that, but I think one thing maybe that's been kind of missed here, there seems to be this thought out in the general marketplace that somehow under, potentially under private ownership, that an entity can suddenly raise their rates. Some of you I know that there is this entity called the Public Utility Commission, Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, that has to approve any increase in rates, just like they do now for PGW. I'd suggest that you check the record because you will find that over the last 3 to 5 years, the PUC has allowed for rate increases by PGW, the now municipally owned gas service. PECO is governed by the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission. They cannot just raise their rates. They are governed by the PUC. and a private entity would be governed by the same PUC. So you cannot just, on your own, raise your rates. So I think that, 3 years after a rate freeze, which we haven't had in the last few years, we'll see what the business environment is. But the one thing I can tell you, unlike the currently owned ownership structure of PGW, in that 3-year period of time, you will see an accelerated investment in pipe replacement, and that's jobs. You will see accelerated investment in the LNG facilities, and that's jobs. And you will see the start, at least, of the venturing into shale gas operations, which the current PGW can't get involved in, and is not in a position to do so, and the expansion, potential expansion of this business beyond the borders of the city of Philadelphia, which the currently municipally owned PGW can't do either. I'm getting the impression out of the corner of my eye that there is a person who wishes or seeks to get my attention, and we need to actually get somewhere. Last question. Sure.
If you find yourself late in the fiscal year and you don't have what you need for the school district's ask, what options do you think we might have? For instance, could we see a return of the soda tax maybe?
Nice try, Troy. Again, I will not on day one start talking about Plan B when I've just laid out Plan A. Can we at least let that live for one day? Look, we get late in the budget process, we'll see where we are. This is not a singular decision that I'm going to make. We have partners upstairs, we have partners in Harrisburg, we have partners in the business community. Let's at least, for the moment, let Plan A be the plan that's out there, and we'll deal with contingencies in April, May, and June. Thanks a lot.
Plan A is though, because it's, even if everything were to fall in place, it would only provide $153 million to the district from the city when the ask was 195, or am I missing something?
No, but I mean, Dale, I appreciate the perspective, but I mean, let's not act like $153 million is nothing. So we have more work to do. Again, I guess the way I could respond is, if certain provisions have been put in place with regard to cigarette tax and split in the sales tax and all that other activity, we probably wouldn't be having this part of the discussion. So I think we're all well aware of what the numbers are, and we know we have more work to do, even in a perfect situation. But this is day one. We have, I guess, about 3 months or so, which even in our world is a fair amount of time, and we're going to keep working on it. Thanks.
Thank you.